Hello, friends. Does the focus of our worship really matter? I hope and pray you'll stay tuned because today on The Logical Truth, we're going to be giving an answer to this question, so just stay right there. Hello, friends, and welcome to The Logical Truth. My name is Wes Garland, and I am the pulpit minister here for the Central Church of Christ here in Saraland, Alabama. And I'm just so very delighted to have you join me today as we continue with this study. Today we're in lesson 2 of our series of understanding worship, and we're talking about the focus of our worship. And really, in all reality, as we get into this, you may be asking, what do you mean the focus of our worship? Well, whenever we're talking about focus, we're talking about the direction or the most concerned about our goal or our aim of our worship. So whenever you think about it from this perspective, you have to think about it like this. We're talking about what is it most concerned about whenever we are talking about worship. What is the direction of it? Is it horizontal or is it vertical? We're talking about our aim. We're talking about our goal or what our purpose is in our worship. So whenever we're talking about that, does it really matter what our focus really is? Because whenever you start looking at a few things, there are some things that we need to be looking at in respect to the different type of aims that we can have within our worship. The very first thing that we're going to be looking at is, what are the aims? Is the aim of our worship ourselves? Now, whenever you think about it, basically summarizing it in this way, is the worship that we conduct ourselves in every first day of the week, or in some cases, some religious groups do it on Saturday, is it about ourselves? Well, whenever we think about ourselves, are we the center focal point of our worship? Is it really all about us and what we are wanting and what we are desiring? Because if that really be the case, I'm always reminding ourselves of Romans chapter 2 and verse number 8. Now notice what he says here. He says, "But to those who are self-seeking and do not obey the truth, but obey unrighteousness, indignation and wrath." Now I want you to think about what he says with this. In the context of Romans chapter 2, he's trying to get us to understand that there are those who are standing approved unto God and those who are not. That good things are going to come to those who are not self-seeking, those who are about God and righteousness and truth and things of that nature. There's going to be blessings that's going to be coming upon those individuals. But in verse number 8 again, watch what he says here. But to those who are self-seeking, those things that are about themselves, and they're not even really concerned about obeying the truth, but obeying just unrighteousness because they're allowing the unrighteous part of them, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life, things of that nature, those type of things are more desirable than what truth is. And in all reality, we have to choose, is it going to be about what I want or what God wants? And in our first lesson, in our very last lesson, we were talking about that it matters who our standard is whenever it comes to our worship. Because the fact of the matter is, can it be ourselves and it all be all right? Well, according to what God says right here in Romans chapter 2, if we're self-seeking and not really concerned about the truth, he says the end result of this is going to be indignation and wrath as a response from God. So it really doesn't sound really good, right? I'm even reminding us of Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4, where he says there, "Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit." It's not about what we want. We're not the focal point, but notice what he says. "But in lowliness of mind," or in humility, "let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look not only for his own interest, but also for the interests of others." See, whenever you're thinking about Christianity in and of itself, is anything really about us? I mean, honestly, ask yourself that question. The only thing that's about us is our response to what God has done for us. That's basically the only thing that's about us and our response to those things. But are we the focal point of anything in worship? Well, according to this passage in Philippians chapter 2, we see very clearly that he also says that we need to be esteeming others better than himself. Not to look at my own interest, but also for the interest of others. So there's others that need to be involved with this. So let me ask you this. If it's not good for us to have ourselves as the aim of worship, then according to this passage, is it simply saying that others now need to be the focal point? Well, let's go into this. Let's study what this means by having others as our aim. Now, I want you to notice what it says right here in John chapter 12 and verse 42. Because in this, notice what he says here. He says, nevertheless, even among the rulers, many believed in him, but because of the Pharisees, they did not confess him, lest they should be put out of the synagogue. Now, let's stop and consider this for a second. Do others themselves really matter when it comes to worship or doing anything in Christianity? Well, whenever we're talking specifically about worship, we see that right now you have some of the rulers that believed in Jesus Christ. They believed that he was the Son of God, but they would not confess him. Why? Because they were more concerned about what others thought. And the penalty for doing such would actually kick them out of the synagogue, and they didn't really want that. They wanted to be pleasing to the people. And therefore, others mattered more than God. So, with that being the case, let me ask you this. Do you think it's good to be considerate of others when it comes to worship as well? Now, I want you to think about this. The only thing that we could really be thinking about in respect to others when it comes to worship is when would be the best time for us all to be able to get together. That's an optional matter, right? Now, we understand that the day of worship is supposed to be on Sunday, the Lord's Day. And then on top of that, as long as the worship requirements that we find within the Scriptures themselves are being followed, then the time of the worship on that day really is insignificant. It's something that we have to figure out what is best for the local congregation that we are members of, what is the best time for us to be together and to do this. And the elders are the ones who make that time up. So in all respects, when we come together for worship, it's not to be thinking about one another, but the focal point needs to be on God. See, the fact of the matter is, are others worth not doing what we are being commanded to do? To speak the truth and things of that matter? No, the others cannot be the aim of our worship. It doesn't matter what Joe and Susie over here wants whenever it comes to worship, because in all reality, we're not worshiping them, right? We're worshiping God, or we're supposed to be. So in all reality, when we come together to worship, what really matters is, what does God have to say about the matter, and what does He desire for us to do in order to worship Him in an acceptable way, just like what we were talking about in our last episode. But the fact is, when God makes a statement that this is what He requires for us to do in order to worship Him in an acceptable way, does it really matter what these other people who are sitting in the pews really think about it? No. We're not there to please them. We're here to please God. Therefore, the third aim of our worship, not ourselves, that we can't do that. Not others, we can't do that. Then what must it be? The aim for our worship must be God. Now, we see this in numerous passages, what we're going to be reading about right here, because even whenever you go back to really Christ's mission, I want you to think about what His focal point was. In John chapter 8, verse 29, He says, "And He who sent me is with me. The Father has not left me alone. For I always do those things that do" what? Please Him. That was His focal point. His whole thought process is thinking about, God, what pleases You? Because in all reality, at the end of the day, it's You who matter. And therefore, because of that, He was all about doing those things that are pleasing to Him. Even Paul, even to the church at Ephesus, even wrote this in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 10, encouraging them to find out what is acceptable to the Lord. Why would he even do that? Why would he encourage them to be finding out what is acceptable to the Lord? Because the Lord is the thing, the one who actually matters in everything of our Christian walk. Because remember, if we're saying that we're Christians, what does the word Christian actually mean? Not followers of self, not followers of others, but followers of Christ. And therefore, if we're followers of Christ, then don't you think it's kind of important to follow that up if we're going to call ourselves Christians, to make sure that we're doing those things that are acceptable to Him? Absolutely, my friends. We even see this over here in Colossians chapter 1 and verse number 10. He encourages the church of Colossae in this manner. He says that you may walk worthily or worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing Him, being fruitful in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God. See, the fact is, he encourages them to not only talk about worship, but in every aspect of their life, he says they need to walk worthy of the Lord. That simply means that we're walking in a way that we are deserving of the Lord. We need to be making sure that we are walking in that way, but also how are we going to do that? Going back to verse number 10, he says, fully pleasing Him and being fruitful. See, the fact is, the aim of everything that we do in Christianity, and worship is not an exception, must be that which is fully pleasing to God. Now, let me ask about another situation. Let me ask you this question. What are we more concerned about? Are we more concerned about physical things or spiritual things? Now, whenever I talk here about physical things, are we more concerned about how many bodies we have in the pew? Are we more concerned about the money that we get in the collection plate? Are we more concerned about the numbers? Are we more concerned about the popularity of physical things? Or are we more concerned about the spiritual? Because the fact of the matter is, we've got to realize that we need to set our minds on something, and that something has to be why we're even here to begin with. Are we here to just focus on the physical? To be concerned about all these physical things that we are going through and talking about congregational wise? Because here's the thing, if you're more concerned about the physical things, then you're willing to sacrifice something else. Fact is, if you're more concerned about the numbers and the money, then you're willing to sacrifice what it takes in order to get there. Now, what do I mean? If you're more concerned about the money and the people sitting in the pews, then you might as well throw this out. Now, we have to remember that the physical things are only a result of the spiritual things being in line. Do we understand that? See, the thing is, the physical things will come as a result. It will come as a reward because of what is actually taking place right here. But the fact is there anything physical in relationship to the church? No. The church is a spiritual dwelling. It's something in which, just like what the Lord said, that the church of Christ, the kingdom of Christ is within you. It's not something of a building. It's not something of a physical dwelling or anything like that. It's us. See, God is not concerned about the physical. You know why? Because He's the one that provides all things. If He wanted us to have it, He can let us have it, if He sees fit. If He's the giver of all things and all life and everything of that nature, then what is He most concerned about? He's more concerned about the spiritual things. He's more concerned about those spiritual things because the status of our relationship with God is what really matters. Now, the fact of the matter is, when we do it God's way, let me ask you this. Do you think God's way will always work, yes or no? Do you think He's an all-powerful God? Do you think He's an all-knowing God? Do you think He knows what is best for His people and what will work? Absolutely. If that be the case, then He's just testing us. Do we believe in His way or not? If it is the case that you do believe in it, then you're going to be more concerned about the spiritual things than the physical. No wonder Paul says over here in Colossians 3 and verse number 2, Set your mind on things above and not on things on the earth. See, it's so very vitally important for us to understand this, because we need to understand that our treasures are not here on earth. What's going to happen when this earth ends? At the end of time, this world and everything in it's going to be burned up. It's going to be destroyed. We can't take those things with us. So if the individuals are the only thing that's going to be living on forever because we're spiritual beings, what do you think really matters the most? The physical or the spiritual? You know, I want to ask you a truly honest question as we continue moving on. Can we please man and still be pleasing God? I mean, in all reality, this is what I'm basically asking. Can we do what man wants us to do and still be pleasing to God? Well, the fact of the matter is, in Matthew chapter 6 and verse 24, Jesus made very, very clear a particular point. He says, no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. I want you to think about this for a second. No one can serve two masters. You know, you cannot have two individuals telling you what to do and what not to do, to be the standard for what is right and what's wrong, to be the go-to in order to know what a person needs to do and not do. The fact is, my friends, I love the logic that the Lord uses here, because after he says that you cannot serve two masters, he automatically goes into saying that for either you will hate the one and love the other, or else you'll be loyal to the one and despise the other. You can't do that. You can't have two standards that you're going by. So in all reality, to simply answer this question, can a person please man, do what they want you to do, and still be pleasing to God whenever He's telling you what to do? My friend, absolutely not. You cannot be men pleasers and be God pleasers at the same time. Why? Because man is one standard and God's another. No wonder he says in Galatians chapter 1 and verse 10, I love it when Paul says this, for now, do I now persuade men or God? Or do I seek to please men? For if I still pleased men, I would not be a bondservant of Christ. You can't be pleasing man over here who is going against God, who is a sinful nature out here. You can't be listening to them and not be listening to God for what you need to do in order to be pleasing to Him. The fact is, you've got to choose, and I have to choose. Do I want to tickle the ears of the individuals to draw men, to have more people in the pews? To have more money? To have more of the physical things in this life? The fact is, I can't. I want to be pleasing to God. The fact is, I love 1 Corinthians 4. Whenever he was being questioned by his brethren, he says, it's a very little thing that I be judged of you. For the one who judges me is the Lord. And that's the same type of mindset that you and I need to have as well. Understand that on the day of judgment, I'm not going to be standing before those individuals. I'm not going to be standing before mankind. I'm going to be standing before God Himself, the Lord Himself, the one who died for me. And my friends, so are you. And with that being the case, do you think that the Lord matters a whole lot more than what the other individuals think about you? Absolutely. My relationship and your relationship with God is the one who needs to be first and foremost in our hearts. You know, I'm even thought about 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse number 4. He says, but as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, even so we speak, not as pleasing man, but God who tests our hearts. Fact is, we've been given a message, right? Been given a message, and because of this, it's been entrusted within us to deliver this message. Nothing else, not anything perverted, not anything that has been changed from this, but truly teaching this. We've become stewards of this, one who takes care of the Word of God. And he says, and that's what we speak. I'm not here to be pleasing men, but God, because it's God who tests our hearts. I love that. And I'm even reminded of what Peter and James said over here in Acts chapter 5, verse number 29. Peter and John standing for the Sanhedrin. He says, but Peter answered, and the other apostles answered and said, we ought to obey God rather than man. They were trying to tell them not to speak in the name of Christ anymore, not to be doing those miraculous things that lead people to draw their attention to God. They said, we told you not to do that. And previous in this chapter, he already told them that if it's more important for us to listen to you rather than God, you have to answer that question. But he follows this up. We ought to obey God rather than man. We ought to obey God rather than you. I know you're in authority and everything, but they had gotten so prideful into thinking that they had the authority to change things. But Peter and John made it very, very clear, didn't they? Our responsibility is to God, not you. You know, I love what Isaiah chapter 2, verse 22 says. Because in this, notice what he says, sever yourselves from such a man, whose breath is in his nostrils, for of what account is he? I love that. Because in other words, this is basically what Isaiah is saying. You need to sever yourself from your responsibility to your fellow man, the one whose breath is in his nostrils, the one who breathes just like you. And he simply corresponds this, of what importance really is he? For of what account is he? Are you going to be judged by him? No, you're not. You need to stop listening to these other individuals that are trying to tell you a different way that we need to be worshiping, another way that we need to be serving God. The fact is, they had lost sight that God has the ability to tell people what they need to do and what is best for them. It's a sad thought, isn't it? That individuals have become so prideful that they believe that they have the right to change what God has simply said. Friend, may we not be like that. May we not be like that at all. See, my friends, do we realize that the focus of our worship must be on God and God alone? Do we understand that? You know, even over here in Exodus chapter 20, at the beginning of the Ten Commandments, mind you, He instills within man his desire for man. He says this, you shall not have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourselves a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them nor serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. My friends, you know why He says that He's a jealous God? Do you know why He says you should not bow down to these idols and these other gods, and understanding those are little g gods? Because there's only one God, the God of heaven, the one you read about in the Bible. And the thing is, He says, you need to understand, all these things that are on the earth are created. They're beings that had to be made. But God Himself is eternal. He's the one who lives outside of the realm of this physical world. And because of that, we need to be worshiping Him, not anything that's of a horizontal fashion. That includes man, that includes family, friends, even yourself. Our aim for worship must be on God and for God alone. You know, I'm even reminded right here in Matthew chapter 4 and verse number 10. Remember whenever Jesus was tempted, He says, if you just bow down to me, I'll give you all these kingdoms. Now watch what He says here as a response. Then Jesus said to him, talking to Satan, away with you, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and Him, what? Only you shall serve. You only shall you serve. Now, I want you to understand what he just made mention of there. He says that God is the only one who is even in the status of being able to be qualified to be worshiped. And you think about even all the way throughout the Bible, you have angels that are all of a sudden appearing, and the next thing you see is that the individuals start to bow down. And what do the angels say? Get up. I'm a created being just as you. Don't worship me. There's only one that you need to worship. And friends, is that in our own mindsets? You know, I want to ask you this serious question right now. If all of this really be the case, why do we go to worship services? Is it about us? Is it what can I get out of worship? Or is it what am I going to give to worship? What am I going to give to God? What am I going to do for Him? Because in all reality, He is the focal point. Why? Because in John chapter 4, verses 23 and 24, remember how He says, but the hour is coming and now is when the true worshipers will worship who? The Father, in spirit and in truth. For the Father is seeking such to worship Him. God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship in spirit and truth. See, the fact is, the focal point of our worship, my friends, is not about us, what we want, what we desire, what we like, and what we don't like. We don't have any say-so at all whenever we come together for worship. Because when we come to worship, it's all about God. It's all about what God desires. God gave His instructions in the first century, and in the 21st century that we're living in now, nothing has changed. Now, with that being the case, my friend, let me ask you a serious question. When you go to worship, are you more concerned about the other people, yourself, or God? My hope and prayer is that we will take a deep look at ourselves and answer that question. Because if it's not about God, you're doing everything in pointlessness. You're doing everything in vain. And may we have the courage enough to say, God, I'm going to stop looking at myself and start looking to you. If you have any questions or comments I want to ask, I hope and pray that you'll reach back out to me, email me, call me, do whatever. But until next time, may God richly bless you. My friend, know that I love you. Have a great day.